present on every continent except for Antarctica. And the result is feeling more perceived. The governments across the globe has passed multi-billion and trillion aid packages. To flatten the curve, millions of people around the globe are quarantined in their home or elsewhere, while infrastructure and transportation systems that bounded us globally and nationally, even locally also, are being used more sparingly now. Long term, what could be the lasting effects on infrastructure and urban infrastructure post COVID, that has to be seen. So in the infrastructure development, and you can say the transportation side, and all the areas related to roads, airports, and other critical infrastructure, has made us globally connected and susceptible to being affected by events happening on the other side of the world. Put another way, our advancements in infrastructure not only provide us with the mean we need to travel and deliver goods throughout the world, it also exposes us to disease like COVID that originate elsewhere. Critical infrastructure in developing countries is often financed, constructed, operated, and maintained using public-private partnerships or by other ways. In the post this pandemic situation, will companies think twice or maybe thrice about participating in these kind of projects? I doubt. Thousands of skilled or unskilled laborers, which are the unsung heroes of our construction industry, have perished. And do we think that it will be easy to gather them together and come back on the track of the development? So we have with us Mr. Bajpai, who has more than 18 years of experience in urban infrastructure sector, focused on large capex projects and leading multidisciplinary teams. Mr. Bajpai is a postgraduate in transport planning from SPA New Delhi and an MBA from ISB Hyderabad, and he has been involved in concept to commissioning of metro rail, urban planning and urban expressway, and in smart city projects, while spearheading advisory to central and state government agency on project development, structuring, and PPP transaction management in client-facing roles. Mr. Vajpayee is presently associated with India Office of Ecoris Netherlands, one of the Europe's leading advisory firm on economic, social, and infrastructure development from last 90 years. We also have Mr. Umang Jain with us. Umang has 12 years of experience in the transportation sector, spanning across project development, traffic demand, feasibility studies pertaining to rural routes, designing, planning of bus, rail, road, and metro systems for various cities in India and abroad. He holds a master's degree in planning with specialization in transport from School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. He also has a master's degree in economics. So, Mr. Bajpai and Umang, over to you. Please enlighten us with your thoughts.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. This is Sudhindra Bajpai this side. So I hope that I am audible to all of you.
Sir, please open your video.
Yeah,
your video is not started, sir.
Yeah, I'm doing a share screen just now. Just give me a second.
Fine, sir.
Is it visible now, the first slide?
Yes, sir. It's visible.
just
I
let me.
request to all panelists, please start your video. So your video will comes out.
So I'll be starting now. So once again, good evening, everyone. My name is Sudhindra Bajpai. And first of all, I would like to thank Sagar and the team Resurgent India for giving us this opportunity to share our thoughts on this highly relevant and live topic of the coronavirus epidemic and its impact on urban infrastructure. What are our thoughts on the same, and what we believe can be the way forward in terms of addressing the concerns which have arisen out of this epidemic. So briefly, the presentation outline, we have structured this into 5 sections. So we will take a minute to speak about ECORIS and the context setting. Then we will come to what are the impacts on the Indian economy briefly. And then we will discuss in more detail about the impact on urban infrastructure. And then what are our suggestions on the way forward. So this is the way in which we will take you through this discussion and presentation. And at the end of our delivery, we will be open to a Q&A session. Depending on the amount of time which we have in hand, we will try to answer the queries from the participants. We are also equally thankful to the participants at this upfront juncture for taking out their time and listening to our thoughts and ideas. So I'll move forward. Briefly about ECORIS. ECORIS is one of Europe's oldest research and consulting firms, which was founded in the year 1929. So last year we completed 90 years of our journey. And a small trivia that one of our earlier directors, Professor Jan Tianbergen, was awarded the first Nobel Prize for economics for his work in 1969. So this should give you some sense of our pedigree and our focus on research, which is primarily based in the domains of economic, social, and infrastructure development. The firm is headquartered in Rotterdam, Netherlands, and we have now offices in 19 countries. It's a small boutique firm with a strength of around 500 people and an extensive expert partnerships as well. And as on date, we have experience of more than 5,000 projects in 150 countries. In India, the offices are in New Delhi and Chennai. About the services we offer and the sectors we cover, we are focused on transport and mobility, urban and regional development, economy and innovation, health and education, energy, water and the environment, and public finance. And the services that we offer across these sectors include consultancy and technical assistance, program management, monitoring and evaluation, and research and policy advice. So this was briefly about our firm ECORIS, whom we represent. Now setting the context, this may be slightly repetitive, but for the sake of the perspective, as we all are aware, coronavirus epidemic started in the Wuhan province of China in late December 2019. Just a little bit of trivia, the virus is the coronavirus, and the disease which one gets affected with because of the coronavirus is called COVID-19. And in general speaking terms, they are both these terms are used in a parallel manner. But the virus is the coronavirus and the disease is called COVID-19. Subsequently, WHO declared COVID-19 as a pandemic on January 30th of this year, and it has now spread to 210 countries, as Sagar has mentioned, almost throughout the globe. There's hardly any place which is not been affected. As on date, almost 2.5 million people have tested positive. There have been almost 177,000 fatalities which have occurred globally. And it has now been established that social distancing appears to be the only recourse for prevention as of now, because till date there is no medicine or inoculation available. They are still under different stages of development and testing. And as a result of which, what has happened is that almost the entire globe has opted for a lockdown scenario where only the essential services are being allowed to run and all the non-essential services have been put on hold. If we look at India, as we speak, more than 20,000 people have tested positive, and there have been more than 600 fatalities, and we are still counting. We don't know still the where the end will be there. The nationwide lockdown, if I include the days of the Janta curfew also, it has been now almost 42 days of lockdown will be there from 22nd of March to 3rd of May 2020. This is unprecedented, not just in India's history, but the global history as well. Now let us look at some big picture impacts. My colleague Umang will go through this section. Umang, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Vajpayee. Good evening, everyone. So the impact on COVID-19 has had a tremendous impact on the Indian economy. And as you might be aware, the gross domestic product of India is about 3 trillion. So it's a $3 trillion economy. And it is the only bright spot currently, because all the other countries, major economies of the world, are slated to have a negative GDP growth going forward. And India is one of the economies whose growth rate shall be positive in the coming year. As stated earlier, 2019 was a year which had a low growth rate of 4.8%, and 2020 was supposed to be a bright light. But with this pandemic, as you can see from the table below, various organizations such as the RBI, Goldman Sachs, and IMF have projected varying growth rates, which is varying between 1.5% to 2%, as against the earlier growth rate of about 6%. So if we translate this into actual numbers, what it means is that this lockdown of 42 days will result in a loss of 120 billion US dollars, which is more than 2.5 times the defense budget of India, and it is also equivalent to 5 times the real budget. Impact on the economy on the various sectors. In tourism and hospitality sector, which is the sector which will be most affected by this coronavirus, because all these the hotels, aviation, these sectors will be affected, and it is estimated that 38 million jobs would be lost alone in the tourism and hospitality sector. Aviation sector will suffer a loss of about $9 billion. The Indian Railways, as we all know, as of now, is because of the lockdown, there is no passenger who is traveling on it, and only freight is moving. It is also estimated to suffer a loss of about $1.9 billion over 3 months. If we aggregate the entire job loss across the economy, it is estimated that about 136 million, or about 14 crore jobs, would be lost in India because of this epidemic. There are fears of high unemployment rate, and there are talks with IMF and World Bank raising the possibility of a recession, which would be of the magnitude of the Great Depression of the 1930s. So this is once in a century kind of an event, and we need to find ways to get out of this, because this really is a humongous problem, both in all facets of the economy, not only financial, but even urban transport infrastructure. Then the various urban and social infrastructure components are listed on your screen. So the most important ones are the transportation systems, which will involve mass transit, which is the bus system, the metro systems, the suburban rail. Then there is intermediate public transport, which basically comprises of the cab aggregators like Ola, Uber, auto rickshaws, e-rickshaws, and all the informal transport that we have in India. Then the other sectors other infrastructure, roads and allied assets, water supply, drainage, housing, electricity, and very important, this e-commerce and supply chain and logistics. So because at this point in time, the only thing which is working are the e-commerce and supply chain. I mean, that too is only for the supply of essential commodities and not the general commodities. But this is what is keeping the economy and the people at home kind of, it is providing some kind of a service so that people don't face too much of hardships. If we talk about the social infrastructure, it comprises of education, healthcare, recreation, sports and events, banking and finance, telecommunication, etc. Now, if we talk about the impact on the physical infrastructure, as we are all aware, all the transportation systems have been shut, and India currently has it has metro systems in more than 12 cities in India, and which has a daily ridership of about 5.2 million. And because of the shutdown, it is estimated that a daily loss of about 12 crore rupees is going to be incurred because of shutting down of metro systems. Similarly, the Bombay-Mumbai Suburban Rail, which is the lifeline of Mumbai, it carries more than 7.6 million passengers on a daily basis. And because of this lockdown, about 4.75 crore rupees there is a loss of 4.75 crores each day. Similarly, the state road transport undertakings operating in the 8 metro cities of India, cumulatively they carry about 2 crore people, and they are incurring a loss of about 35 crores every day. Buses, as you know, and these are only buses in the organized sector. This is the formal buses. So about 142,000 buses operate. These are government-owned buses, owned and operated buses, and they carry about 7.8 crore passengers on a daily basis, which is more than 3 times the Indian Railways. And there is humongous loss of about 140 crores on a daily basis because of the buses not operating. If you add up all these, the ridership is about 20.6 million, and the loss every day is more than 156 crores. And as we very well know that all these mass transit systems, the ridership is basically, you get the ridership on these mass transit systems because of the IPT services, which are the rickshaws, cycle rickshaws, auto rickshaws, and all these. And they basically comprise of 25-30% of the mass transit trips. So if the mass transit system is shut down, naturally the ridership on the intermediate public transport is also affected. As I had already pointed out earlier, so there is also impact on the road usage. India's vehicular fleet is more than 20 crores, about 21-22 crores as on date. And out of this, 95% of the stock is off-road. So nearly 20 crore vehicles are not operating. And even last year, the road fatalities in India was about 1.5 lakhs. So we estimate that in this period of lockdown, about 20,000 road fatalities will be avoided, which is the only bright spot if you talk about this. So 20,000 lives would be saved because of this lockdown. Reduction, and because the vehicles are not operating, naturally there is the fuel saving. So petrol imports will go down by 87,000 tons, and similarly diesel imports are also going to go down by 75,000 tons. Another bright spot, as we have been reading in the newspapers and all, that what could not have happened by pumping in billions of rupees, because of this lockdown, river Ganga and Yamuna have, there is a reduction in pollution, and we are kind of seeing a revival of these rivers. Now, the impact on social infrastructure. There is a surge in the usage of internet, and as one can see, the ADPU has shot up from 4 GB per month to 8 GB per month, which is roughly a twofold increase. As we are doing right now also, because these physical meetings have now been replaced by virtual meetings on platforms like Skype, Zoom, and the like. There's a tremendous growth in in the business of these platforms. Online banking is also being used, but unfortunately, the digital payments have taken a hit because of the closure of online platforms. E-commerce, there is another sector, e-commerce, with all these Amazon and Flipkart and all the likes of these. There is increased demand for essential items. So only essential items, as you know, are being allowed to be delivered in the period of the lockdown, but all other goods which these e-commerce platforms used to deliver are not allowed. So they're taking a hit on an overall basis, but some essential items, delivery of essential items is actually picking up. And what we are going to see is that there is a likely increase in cost of business because of the decrease in volumes and the GMP.
Thank you.
To take this forward now.
Yeah, thank you, Umang, for sharing the quick perspectives. What this essentially means is that there is a tremendous impact on the Indian economy, and including the urban infrastructure sectors. We have shared very, very brief snippets of a few sectors, not all of them, because the subject is such that the discussion would go very, very long, and the list would be very, very long. So we have restricted ourselves to a few snippets, and the others, most of us are aware. What this really means is that we will have to create new paradigms to address these challenges. And one fact which is emerging is that we are also thinking in terms of long-term social distancing practices. And these social distancing is actually the antithesis of resource sharing, which is the fundamental of urban infrastructure supply. So if you look at metro rail, if you look at IPT, if you look at buses, all of them are based on the fundamental principle of sharing of assets and resources, whereas the principle of social distancing would want to work the other way around and induce one into adopting individual resources. So how do we address these challenges? So what we are going to do from here onwards is that we will focus on what can be done with respect to the urban transport sector, because as I had briefly mentioned, we would want to limit the aspect of this our current discussion. So as I move forward, the bottom line is that the final picture will emerge in times to come. And when we will have normalcy like we used to have before the 22nd of March is anybody's guess. We still don't know what will happen. So let us briefly let us delve upon what we can do and what we should do. So what we have done is that we have formulated our suggestions into two main categories. One is the short-term measures and one is the long-term measures. And the fundamental principle, which although it is still relevant and implemented in our country, but we believe that it will need further strengthening. And that fundamental principle remains that we frame the right policy, we devise the right plan based on the policy, we develop the right project from our plans, and then we formulate the right implementation mechanism of the projects to translate them into on-ground realities. This fundamental principle will have to be strengthened in a very, very short time and in a very, very specific manner. This is what we will have to do going forward. So let us look at some of the short-term measures which we will have to take recourse to. Now, as I had mentioned, the dichotomy of shared resources versus social distancing. What people are thinking is that we may have to control crowds in the metro systems. We may have to allocate alternate seats in the railway coaches. We may have to allocate alternate seats in the aeroplanes. But that would lead to a severe underutilization of resources and would impact the financials of all these service providers. But it is strangely enough that the urban transport scenario presents an opportunity even in this bleak scenario of higher asset utilization. And how that can be done is by segregating both temporally as well as physically of the travel demand. What I essentially mean is that having different timings for different type category of users. As we know, schools start early and end early. Typically, there is very less traffic on the roads when the schools open, and these either a person is taking the child to the school through his own vehicle, or the school bus is coming. Traffic is relatively thinner because of the timing aspect, and also because of the new policies which encourage parents to select schools which are nearer their homes. Gone are the days when people used to travel from one end of the city to the other end of the city just for education purposes. In a similar manner, we will have to plan temporal as well as zonal segregation. For example, offices may have to follow distributed timings. Shops may have to follow day-wise allocation depending on the type of shop. Malls and theaters, again, a very, very difficult scenario, especially for movie theaters, because people would be averse and hesitant to go to places where there is congregation. It will not be easy. As as we speak, I have not really been able to come to some idea which will solve this particular problem. Again, wholesale markets, extended working hours. Maybe they may have to run 24/7 such that crowd generation is reduced to the minimum. Even as I speak, you may be aware that the Gazipur, the Azadpur Mandi in New Delhi, which is Asia's largest wholesale market for fruits and vegetables, the government has decided that it will be open 24/7, and they are introducing a quota system so that only a limited number of people can be present in the premises of the mandi at a certain point of time. Not just entry, but exit is also being controlled. One is being given a definite time frame within which one is supposed to complete his requirements and then make an exit so that the other people can use the same facility. Sectors like IT, ITES, BPO, and KPO, and other similar industries may have to encourage employees to work from home, because these are some of the sectors where the disruption, it is being claimed, is lesser as compared to other sectors which demand and require physical movement of people. For example, sales and marketing. While the normal paradigm was that these demand face-to-face interactions, it's quite possible that we may have to think of newer ways of carrying out these activities so that the physical movement people is reduced to the maximum extent possible. Maybe even adoption of an odd even policy at not just Delhi but at a higher level to reduce the number of people on the road. Let me come to some long-term measures which we think would be required. So first is that we have developed the National Urban Transport Policy about a decade ago, but it exists only on paper. We believe that it is time to revisit this policy and implement some of the very important delivery mechanisms which are enshrined in this National Urban Transport Policy. A few of these being the need for having an integrated approach to land use and transportation, because both are highly interrelated, and for transport supply and demand control, integration between these two is the key. We will have to focus on more transit-oriented developments which reduce the need to travel, which basically envisage provision of housing multi-activity zones in pockets within the city, such that the need to travel itself is reduced, and whatever travel is required can be facilitated either through walking or by non-motorized modes or by shared modes. A very important aspect is going to be the use of technology and data to prepare dynamic transport supply for the city. I will come to this in a bit more detail in my subsequent slides. Although we have one of the highest average per user use of data, almost 90% of the population has access to a mobile. But when it comes to transport supply and demand planning, we are not using our resources, not just efficiently, but hardly at all. We are not capturing the basic matrices which are required for planning these infrastructure projects through use of technology. And last but not the least, we will have to inculcate the mechanism of updating the planning and policy documents at regular intervals. I will come to this in a little bit more detail in my subsequent slides, but this will have to be set up as a strategic intervention. We are aware that many large private sector corporates have a strategy function at their head offices, which comprises of a group of select people who are only focused on the future of the business, who are not involved in the day-to-day operations. They think about improving the future operations, and their focus is on strategic business development. I think so we will have to adopt similar policies in the public sector also. Now, coming to a bit more about how IT and technology can play a role in what we need to address. We all are aware that India has the world's largest IT manpower. We have the largest firms like TCS, Infosys, Cognizant, and the others who are providing their outsourcing services to the developed economies. Their penetration within the Indian economy is roughly 1/5 of what they do outside the country. I believe it is time for this ratio to get inverted. And if not inverted, at least 50% of their revenue should be generated from within the country. Now, speaking briefly of what can be done to manage the crisis on an immediate term, these are very small measures, but we believe that these can have a lasting impact on managing the situation. The government of India has already developed the Arogya Setu app. Again, it is an excellent example of the engagement of the private sector, because the app per se has been developed by a technology firm, but it is being used and promulgated by the government of India. The installation of this app should be made mandatory, and it can be enforced through the mobile service provider. Adequate advance notice should be given to the telephone users that they have to download and install the app, and failing which, after a certain period of time, the SIM card should stop working, and one can resume the basic services only after the app has been installed. And then this app can be used for real-time tracking and supervision. Now, the audience may believe that this is nothing new, which I am telling, and that is correct. The only new thing which I am telling is that this should be made mandatory, so that supervision, tracking, and monitoring becomes more widespread. The government is able to have a better sense of what is happening. I believe the next most important point is data acquisition and analysis, and this need to be focused on a long-term basis. Now, this has to be with respect to both the traveler as well as the supplier. For example, if I look at the traveler, at least I have never filled or come across any questionnaire from any government department which asks me to proactively inform the government about my itinerary details or my daily trips. Whereas if I look at the Olas and Ubers of the world, they have demonstrated that data capturing is no rocket science. All your trip details are always captured when you use these cab aggregator services. And we do these voluntarily, fully knowing that our data is being captured. But if the government was to propose a similar request, I'm sure many of us would balk at the idea. But I believe this is the right time that we have to start thinking on these lines, because traveling information and data about the baseline trip and travel characteristics of the users and the travelers is the basic fundamental on which the transport supply can be designed. Next is the supplier. Now, when I say IT-enabled systems on metros, buses, and IPT, dynamic planning and provisioning, we are very well aware of the extent of IT infrastructure that is being used by all these modes. It is reasonably high for the metros, but it is below average as far as all the other modes are concerned. What you basically look at is a little bit of handheld ticketing devices, a little bit of passenger information system, a little bit of routing and scheduling. But in developed economies, this is a whole new science which has been taken up in a very proactive manner by the transport authorities, so that they can plan and provide their services in a very scientific manner. Next is ITS, Intelligent Transportation Systems. And this is mainly effective in real-time traffic management. We have tried this in bits and pieces in certain parts of metropolitan cities. Three cities which come to my mind immediately are Delhi, Mumbai, and Bhubaneswar, again, where the implementation is partial. And while data is being acquired, analysis is still almost nil. We are not using the data which we are capturing through these automated modes. And last but not the least is rule and regulation enforcement. We are already seeing automated challans, automated insurance premia, and a host of other measures which can be challans for overspeeding, challans for red light jumping, challan for stoplight jumping, challan for endangering the life of a pedestrian. These are several aspects which are being implemented in developed economies. And now it is surprising to note that several of these systems which are being used in the developed economies have been developed by Indian IT firms. I will not take names right now, but I am very well aware that this is happening. And even the ones which have been developed in the advanced economies, the team almost invariably has Indian professionals as a part of the core team. I believe it is the time we start thinking in terms of a national transport data bank. And architecture can be similar to the CCTNS, which is the crime and criminal tracking network system, which has been developed by the Ministry of Home Affairs of the Government of India for national level crime and criminal tracking. The architecture is very flexible. It provides freedom at state level for implementation, whereas the design is controlled at the central government level. And it is one of the most recent and better examples of federalism, where the state and the central governments are cooperating with each other in development of a pan-India system. Moving ahead, some thoughts on personal information capture and capacity augmentation in the long term. I would request my colleague Umang to go through this slide.
Sure. So as we are well aware that the personal information is being disclosed on various social media platforms such as Facebook, Insta, LinkedIn, etc. So the core point that we are trying to make is that we should there should be linking of database, so that it helps in two aspects. One is planning of transportation systems, traffic circulation, traffic management, and the other way that this can help is in traffic in enforcement. So as Mr. Bajpayee earlier talked about issuing challans and the like. So if because there is in India, we have seen instances where where the documents are forged. So people carry duplicate licenses and things like that. So if the data is interlinked and is on a digital platform, the chances of this happening is less, and we can enforce more effectively. So as he said earlier also as well, that Google captures these actions of users. So once you're carrying a mobile phone, we invariably or unknowingly or knowingly, we kind of allow Google to access our travel patterns. I mean, wherever we are going, it is tracking us. The banking industry is also using, it has already started acquisition and analysis of data. You can very well see your CIBIL score based on if you have defaulted on your payments or you're not, then you're ranked based on how you performed.
Just to intervene here, your financial transaction history is tracked by CIBIL, even whether you want it or you don't want it. It is a part of the architecture which has been set up by the authority. This is the point I am trying to make, that we are already sharing data at several locations and across several platforms. We may be doing that in a subdued and unknown manner, but so be it for the planning requirements of the transport sector as well. Stop.
Yeah. And Aadhaar, and to help things, we already have Aadhaar. I mean, Aadhaar has penetrated the entire country for so many years. So in order to link various platforms, various government documents like a driving license, Aadhaar, Arogya Setu, Aadhaar will be actually a very, very good ecosystem which is already built. So as we were talking about challans and enforcement, if we can link the driving license, Aadhaar, and along with the Arogya Setu app, which will tell us about the corona patients, I mean, this will be a very, very important and effective tool in order to get around this problem of coronavirus by at least trying to avoid places which are containment zones or hotspots in future as well. And this will be very, very important in going ahead. In terms of the long-term measures that to enhance capacity, the UMTA, which is the Unified Metropolitan Transport Authority, which is basically an apex authority at the city level. So all matters relating to urban and transport planning will be handled by this apex authority, so that the coordination issues are taken care of by this single apex authority. So it's a single window clearance system. Because to give you an example, if you want to construct a bus stop anywhere in Delhi, you will have to get permissions from 23 authorities, which is practically impossible. And even if somehow, if you can manage that, the amount of time and effort which is required is humongous. So it is time that we actually plan for an UMTA. It has been existing on paper for about 10 years, which this idea came into being about 10-15 years back with the Jawaharlal Nehru Urban Renewal Mission. But there are very few cities who have actually gone ahead and developed this UMTA and have regular meetings. Most of the cities have developed this on paper, but the meetings happen very sporadically. Another thing which needs to be done is that this UMTA needs to be given financial authority. So based on the performance of the various transport related agencies and the other agencies, as well as the compliance. So if the agencies are complying and performing up to a certain standard, then this UMTA should release funds to these authorities. If not, then they should take some other action. Because without financial authority, this is a kind of a toothless organization. So it is very, very important that financial authority be provided to this authority in order to for it to function in an efficient manner. We also know that the government authorities, basically the authorities which deal with transport, many of these people in these authorities require training, technical training, or some kind of training in transportation. So there is a dire need of conducting a training need assessment, and also that the government officials in these departments are exposed to the state-of-the-art innovations, technology, so that the enforcement and planning can be taken care of in an efficient manner. And for this, the motivation will be the key. The government needs to have a will to kind of make it happen. Over to you for the next slide, Mr. Vajpayee.
Okay, thank you, Umar. So this is our last slide on this discussion. Sagar is also sending pointers to me to end it quickly so that we can have the interaction round. So we believe that there are 5 key takeaways which we have from this scenario and which we need to focus on going forward to be able to handle, if God forbid any such crisis happens ever again, so that we are able to handle and manage such a crisis more effectively. I think so. First of all, planning and policy will have to be future ready. We will have to be futuristic, and they will have to be started at the right time. And plans, we make lots of plans, but plans should also have action plans which give very specific targets for implementation of the development plans. That is the first one. Second is that a one size fits all approach will have to make way, and I will use the term mass customization will have to be adopted. This is basically related to the time and temporal segregation of activities and functions. I think we have already spoken a lot on the fact that tech will have a very, very significant role to play. Data capture, data storage, and analysis will play a crucial role in the demand supply assessment. And once these are there in place, we will be able to handle the fluctuations in demand during such times of crisis in a more efficient manner, and the spikes which will result once the situation normalizes in a more efficient manner. I think so. Personal information will have to be defined. Capturing personal information for planning purposes will have to be commissioned, and rules and regulation will have to be drafted for this purpose. And last but not the least, the capacity of the public authorities is limited. I believe the private sector will have to be engaged more across the life cycle of the services. And we have some very pertinent examples from other sectors, and I will not go into the details, but sectors like electricity and across generation, transmission and distribution, sectors like telecom, sectors like aviation, we are witness to the efficiencies which come into the service delivery once this private sector is involved in a planned manner. And just to make my point of planning timely, I was going through the status on the development of the DDA Master Plan 2021. Now, 2021 is next year, and right now the revision is only in the consultation stages. And without taking names, friends in the industry suggest that only 20 to 25% of the work has been done. And an exercise of this scale takes roughly 3 years of time to be finalized, because there is extensive stakeholder consultation, there is public consultation, then there is review by the legislature, and ultimately there is the notification. The entire process takes 3 years. If I am not mistaken, Master Plan 2011-21 was notified somewhere around 2015. So we can very well imagine that if this is the state of affairs in the capital city of the country, what would be happening elsewhere. plans have expired and no one has bothered to update them. And without planning, there is no activity which is the way it ought to be. So this is all from our side, and now we will be open to taking questions, and we will try to the best of our capacity to answer your queries. Over to you, Sagar.
Thank you so much, Sudhindra and Umang. It's really a great and very briefly described description of everything, whatever is happening around. Even though what I thought is, what do you think about the proposals and the present packages which government has in its hand, and what do you think after this? Once the lockdown will be over, how fast it can be taken off, and how fast the kickoff meetings and other things can be done so that the project can be kick started. There are so many projects which are yet to be finalized by government. It is under evaluation, and some of them are just submitted, and few of the projects are under progress, you can see. But since all the laborers and everything, even the consultants like us and other contractors, they are bound to work from home. In that stages, we cannot go out and work for the client, right? Even so, in that case, what do you think? How much time it will take to regrow this infrastructure field, and how fast we can start all these things? There should be any the government should come with I'm just giving a suggestion, like the government should come with its new policies of infrastructure, or any new way forward, like they should not extend any date of submissions. They should not they should pressurize the consultants to make the reports fast. The approval will come fast, and the contractor will be appointed very soon, so that the work could be started in time and finished in time.
Sagar, you have asked a very pertinent but a very tricky question. You see, to put a timeline to this is quite difficult as of now, because it is still anyone's guess as to what stage of the spread we have reached in the country. But to answer your question, what I would say is that uh, all the packages which the government has given right now are fiscal packages predominantly, because right now the government is trying to support the people who cannot fend for themselves, and all of this is having a great bearing on the exchequer. And as we all know, the first sector which gets hit when there is diversion of funds is the infrastructure sector. So you may not want to make that great world-class airport right now, but you may want to use that money to feed the people who cannot afford even food in these difficult times. You may not want to build the world-class Mumbai Pune or Mumbai Nagpur expressway right now, because already other modes and facilities are available. You always have the current road, you always have the flight, and you always have the train, because the money has gone somewhere else. So one thing which definitely comes to my mind is that in order to fast track, if the government takes reasonable time in decision making and review of the consultants works, that could be the first step. I guess all of us have gone through this agony of a scenario where the client is on our head that submit this as of yesterday, and when you submit this tomorrow, they give you a feedback after 2 months. So the time they take to come up to their decisions is often longer than the time then that a consultant has made to prepare, to collect data, to analyze, to formulate, and to submit the report. So I believe the first thing is that the government needs to act in a more coordinated and a focused manner. Decision making should be made faster. It should be more practical, and that would greatly help revive the sector. As far as the new projects which are in different stages of approval are concerned, as far as the projects which are under implementation are concerned, right now there is again limitation on the movement of the laborers and the workers who are involved in the construction activities. I guess without lifting that these restrictions, it will be a difficult scenario. But again, it's a devil's alternative for the government. So it has to pay it, whether it saves lives or whether it saves livelihood is the question one has to ask. And frankly speaking, I do not have an answer for this. This is the way I would put that
I
answer your question.
totally agree and understand from your point of view. But even I have mentioned in my previous speech that thousands of unskilled and skilled laborers, which are unsung heroes of our construction industry, have perished all the way. Now, I don't think so. We will be able to, cater them together and come back on the track of development very soon. In near future. It is little bit difficult, and but of course the way outs are there. Now I think we have lot of questions from the people, and we will go through from that. It's to all the participants. It's too many questions are there. We'll try to reply each of the question, but if in case we will not able to do it, we request you to personally email us your query, and we will be happy to answer that. For as of now, I'll take few of the questions from the participants. So, what according to you should this Mr. Amrendra has asked? What according to you should be the plan for government to recover with these losses, especially in transport system in two-tier cities? What should be the action from government to push the e-commerce market, online delivery system in tier two cities?
Omang, would you want to answer that one?
Yeah, sure. So I think, see, because most of these, the losses that are being incurred are incurred by the government, and it's actually the taxpayers' money which is not getting recovered. So the only way to recover it is actually as soon as is that when the lockdown kind of gets over, things are going to get back on track, and we should also think about innovative ways of financing or innovative ways of generating revenue. We should not be totally dependent on the fare box revenues, because these social distancing norms are here to stay for a while at least. So we should kind of concentrate on ways of generating revenue through property development, through commercial exploitation of the infrastructure these authorities have, and come out with these kinds of ways to minimize the losses which are being incurred at this point in time. It's very, very difficult to recover these losses through farebox alone. In the best of times, farebox accounts for about 50 to 60% of the costs. So even the best of time, if you can recover only 50% of the cost, imagine what will be the scenario under these social distancing norms. So the short answer to that is to think of innovative ways of generating revenue.
Okay. Mr. Sanjay, I guess this is the same kind of question. Let's.
So Sagar, even as you look at the questions, just to add on to what Umang had said, a very pertinent example is the way the transport authority in Bangalore is working on these
Surinder, if you
long-term.
can just, I'm sorry to interrupt, if you
Yeah.
can just on your video so that,
You want me to share my screen?
no, no, not screen your video, if you can open it.
My video.
Yeah.
Okay, I will try.
Yeah. So please continue. You were saying something.
Yeah. So just to add on to what he had said, to cite an example, uh, the way the Bangalore Urban Transport Authority is handling is that they are developing commercial complexes at their prominent bus stations. And again, this will add on to the fare box revenue through rental revenues. Now, in such type of a scenario, if even at other cities are also follow this model, and there are the other cities of Gujarat, several cities in Gujarat which have followed this model. So even so, if the operations are stopped, their revenues do not go down to zero. So this is a very once in a lifetime type of a scenario where everything has stopped. But even if you look at a generic scenario where for some reason even if the operations stop, there are other sources of revenue which are available to the authority and which provide a limited amount of cash flows for sustenance. So this is the way it can be done forward. It cannot be a short-term recovery mechanism. I guess authorities will have to start thinking long-term of shoring up their revenues.
Okay, great. So Mr. P.S. Bhatia has also asked what will happen to the privacy of citizen if, as per your suggestion, the government mandates to install apps to track their activities and there are no checks, balance for use of data and information so collect.
Yeah, thank you, Sagar. You see, installation of an app making it mandatory does not mean that the system of checks and balances will not be ensured. And I would always like to believe that the government has a better system of checks and balances as compared to any private authority. The moment you buy an Android smartphone, which is a Google operating system based, you are unknowingly sharing all your information with a private organization. Many of us may have uh, read and even seen on YouTube, etc., a recent article where a person created a traffic jam type of a scenario by using several mobiles in a tray and carrying them to a location. Now we think that our location is tracked by Google only if we switch on the location by by toggling the button. That is not the case. Each and every minute your mobile phone is on, your location is being tracked by a private organization. And not just tracked, it is being used, analyzed to understand your travel patterns, to understand your behavior choices, to understand your likes and dislikes. I would always say that a government facilitated mechanism would have a fairer means of checks and balances. That is my limited answer to this.
Okay, I guess there are and number of questions we have, so we are also running short of time as we have to end this session. I'll fix it up with let's say one or two questions more. The coming up question is training at the lower level in government departments is vital. For example, many of the ministries and departments lack the specific technical skills to do the master planning below the joint secretary level. Their skills are dated. How would you solve this problem?
I would like to cite the example of two organizations which have taken up training in a very, very proactive manner. One is SIDCO in the state of Maharashtra, and one is the Highways Department of the government of Tamil Nadu. In fact, what they have done is, and this can be answered better through an anecdotal example. What they have done is that they have taken funding from the World Bank to, first of all, identify the training needs. So what they have done is they have engaged consultants who are developing an entire framework of training for them, and which is starting from training need assessment. Each and every employee is asked questions in a specific format and manner as to what are his or her training needs, depending on the job description which he has. The training needs are assimilated, and a training program is formulated, curriculum is formulated, and again, depending on the job description, it includes both in-house as well as outsourced training provisions for all the employees. And when I mean all, it means all the employees. So this will have to be taken up. This is something which has been lacking, and it will be up to the central and the state governments to allocate funds for this activity. This will have to be made a compulsory component of the budget, just like we have incidentals and overheads. A separate subject will have to be created for training. I believe this is the way forward.
Thank you so much. Mr. Rohan Nanda has asked, as am I into facilitating the funding for the borrowers, how Ecoris can help into that?
I believe this is not related to
Yeah,
the
I
subject of
also think that.
this. We can take this offline.
Right. Okay, so yeah, Mr. Mrudalidhar has asked, India is a country of 1.3 billion people with high population per kilometer. In such a scenario, do you think the suggestions made in slide 15 are practicable? For that, I guess you need to go to your slide number 15.
I will go there, but can you just repeat that question, please?
Yeah, sure,
Please.
sure. I'll do that.
Yeah.
So he's saying India is a country of 1.3 billion people with high population per kilometer. I guess.
High population density.
Okay.
Yeah.
In such a scenario, do you think the suggestions made in slide 15 are practical?
Just let me go to my slide.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So to answer this, I would like to answer this in two parts. So there were two measures there. One was the short-term measures, and the second was the long-term measures. So as far as the long-term measures are concerned, it's an emphatic yes. There is absolutely no need to doubt on the suggestions vis-a-vis the long-term which have been proposed over there. Now, as far as the short-term measures are concerned, I would like to interpret his question slightly differently. I believe what he means to say is that high population density in the country also translates into a lot of mixed land use in the country. Now that is right, but there are two types of development models which are prevalent in our country. One is the zonal development plan model, which is more prevalent in several metropolitan cities. And then there is the mixed land use model, where there are no specific zones allocated for a specific activity, but different types of activities are spread all over the city. So yes, as far as metropolitan cities are concerned, which follow a zonal development model, again, there is no need to doubt that the suggestions which have been given in that under those heads will not hold. But yes, as far as cities with more mixed land use and which are smaller in size are concerned, yes, I would agree that the applicability of the short-term measures and their impact may be somewhat limited. But yes, those are difficult cases to handle, and on a case-to-case basis, we may have to develop different strategies for tackling those. And as I have also mentioned, one size fits all approach cannot be adopted. So while there is a policy and a planning document which acts as a general guideline, I believe we will have to be innovative in devising custom-made solutions. So for the second type of cities, we may have to think differently.
Okay, thank you so much, Sudhendra. I guess we should conclude it now. So for ending the session, I would just like to brief gist in this, whatever the presentation and the discussions we had. So what I can think is most likely that this outbreak will have longer term impacts to our individual behavior and lifestyle, the way we work, the way we consume, the way we travel, and the way we use infrastructure facilities created by government and other private players. Even though not yet to be finally assessed, the economic impact of the outbreak in the public transport and shared mobility sector is most likely severe, as infrastructure and urban transport is directly linked to economic development and dependent of fares and the subsidies, the loss of revenue is most likely inevitable. Besides that, these Uber and Ola players which you have mentioned, they and the other labor classes, they are so-called gig economy workers, and likewise people here which are going to be affected. So in that case, we should definitely players like you and other big consultants should pressurize or make some point to government officials, since you are quite approachable to them. So so that government should take private some early decisions on the policies and how we can cope up with these situations. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, all the participants. And Sudhir, I guess if there is something you want to add, please add.
Just as a concluding remark, I would like to thank all the participants once again. I would also like to thank you and your entire team for providing us this opportunity. Please share the questions with us, and we will be happy to answer all the questions.
And of course, there are people who have asked to share this presentation. We will be sharing this presentation with all of you, whomsoever is required. Please mail us your requirements. So just to end this, I would like, since we all are fighting in this period, I just want to end this meeting with, I was just reading one poetry book. So there was one very good, 2 lines were there. So I just want to read it out. राह संघर्ष की जो चलता है, वही संसार को बदलता है. So here we all are fighting, right? राह संघर्ष की जो चलता है, वही संसार को बदलता है. जिसने रातों में जंग जीती है, रातों को I can as of now count as कोरोना, जिसने रातों को जंग जीती है, सूर्य बनकर वही निकलता है. So here from the end of this session, thank you for participating, and thank you all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.